In the glimmering towers of Genbridge Biotech in San Francisco, where the glass walls reflect not only the skyline, but the unspoken hierarchies of wealth and race, a black janitor breaks the rules. What begins as a quiet, human act of dancing with a silent child becomes the tremor that shakes an empire. Behind a glass door, a father watches and cries for the first time in years. This is not just a story of difference. It's about presence, about what happens when someone without power dares to matter. Marissa Johnson, 34, was already awake when the sun slid between the blinds of her tiny Oakland apartment. The room was barely big enough to fit the pull-out bed, her sister's air mattress, and a folding table with two mismatched chairs. A child's shoe lay tipped over in the hallway, a quiet reminder of the life they were trying to keep balanced. Marissa moved quietly, not to wake her niece. Her shoes were already by the door. Black, work-grade, clean but worn. The bus ride across the Bay Bridge into San Francisco always felt longer than it was. It wasn't just the time, it was the crossing, from survival to opulence, from the cracked concrete of East Oakland to the polished marbled entry of Genbridge Biotech. She sat on the far left, window seat, arms tucked tight. Her headphones were off. She liked to hear the city waking up. She needed to remember where she really was. The headquarters loomed like a modern temple. Glass walls, robotic doors, a lobby that smelled like citrus and ambition. Marissa entered through the service entrance. Her badge, labeled Contract Staff, Janitorial Services, beeped faintly as she pushed her cleaning cart onto the 4th floor. She was assigned there and the 5th. Nowhere else. The elevators that went above required a separate access, not that she ever asked. 4th and 5th only. You know the deal, muttered Marco, the security guard at the dock entrance. Don't try to be cute and go exploring. Upstairs is where the money lives. He barely looked at her. She nodded wordlessly, no smile. She'd smiled once on her first day, and someone called her too familiar. At 9:15 a.m., while wiping down a glass conference table on the 5th floor, she heard a voice through the open doorway. Just a cleaner, don't stress it, someone laughed. She didn't turn. The comment wasn't new, like background static, but it landed somewhere below her ribs anyway. Lunch was a quiet moment on a metal bench in the utility corridor. She pulled out her lunchbox. Empty. She'd given the last of her leftovers to her niece that morning. A single taco and half an apple. I'm not really hungry anyway, she'd said, pretending to laugh. Her stomach told a different story now. At 2:03 p.m., she heard it. Music. Not the synthetic playlists that echoed through the building's speakers, but soft, vintage, raw. Moon River. The kind of melody that lives in bones more than ears. Marissa stepped closer to the cracked door of a glass-walled conference room at the far end of the hallway. Inside was a boy. He looked no older than 7. Sitting in a corner, knees to his chest, large noise-canceling headphones hugging his ears. His fingers moved slowly in rhythm, mimicking dance motions. Something like ballet, but gentler, more hesitant. No one else was in the room. Marissa quietly rolled her cleaning cart back, removed the clanging mop, sat slowly on the floor just inside the threshold, barely visible. She didn't speak. She just watched. Then, softly, she moved her hands, mirroring him. Not exactly, but close, like a shadow responding to another shadow. He noticed. His movements sharpened, then softened again, bending toward hers like branches in the same breeze. And then, without a word, they danced. Not in unison, not perfectly, but in empathy. a silent waltz between strangers who recognized each other without knowing how or why. "You dance better than anyone on this floor," she whispered, more to the air than to him. He didn't speak, but he smiled. Behind a closed glass door, a man stood frozen. Kevin Lance, 42, CEO of Genbridge Biotech, hadn't intended to stop. He'd been heading to a board meeting with investors from Zurich, but the moment he saw his son, usually locked in his own world, moving with someone else, his feet rooted to the ground. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, just watched. And then he cried. Quietly. Alone. Behind a door no one else could see through. Marissa never knew he was there. She ended the interaction with a gentle bow of the head and stood. The boy waved as she left. Her hands trembled as she gripped the mop handle, but her face remained neutral. She was used to holding emotion like breath, tightly, silently. Back in the staff hallway, her walk resumed. The cleaning cart rattled slightly over a loose tile. She paused to tighten it with her foot. No one saw her. No one ever did. But something had changed. Not for her. Not yet. But above her, in the office where decisions are made, a door had quietly opened, and someone had finally looked. The next morning, Marissa arrived early. Earlier than usual. The building felt different, though nothing on the outside had changed. Same security guard, same ID swipe, but the silence inside the elevator as it rose felt expectant, heavy. She didn't go to her assigned floors that day. Instead, her badge didn't beep at all, because she was stopped by a woman from HR before she even clocked in. "Marissa Johnson?" the woman asked without warmth. "You've been requested on the 10th floor. Executive offices, right now." It wasn't a request. It never was. Marissa hesitated, then nodded. She followed the woman through a corridor of frosted glass walls and muted voices. No one smiled. The air smelled sterile, like antiseptic and cold coffee. In a glass conference room sat two people, a human resources director and Kevin Lance. He didn't smile either. "You know who that boy was?" the HR woman asked. Her voice clipped. Marissa's mouth went dry. She nodded slowly. Kevin spoke next, his voice colder than his eyes. "Why were you with him?" She met his gaze. No fear, no apology, just quiet resolve. "Because he was alone," she said. "And I wasn't performing. I was just there." Kevin's jaw tightened, but something in his expression wavered, as if her words struck a nerve that had long been buried. "You're not allowed on that floor," the HR director interrupted sharply. "Shh, there are reasons for—" "Reasons like fear," Marissa said softly. "Or just habit." Kevin held up his hand. The woman went quiet. He turned to Marissa fully now. "No one in this building would believe you," he said quietly. Marissa took a breath. "I'm not here to be believed," she replied. "I'm here to clean. And I danced because for 5 minutes someone saw me. And I saw him." The room fell into silence. He pulled a file from the table. Her file. "You taught dance?" he asked. Marissa nodded. 10 years, before my mother got sick." He flipped another page. "Contemporary, ballet, improvisation, bachelor's in movement therapy. Why are you—" "I clean," she said. "Because grief doesn't pay rent, and because you don't see people like me as anything else." Kevin sat back in his chair. His eyes, once cold, now held something more complicated. Guilt, perhaps. maybe shame. I want you to work with him, he said suddenly. Not as a janitor, as someone. Just a few days. Marissa didn't answer right away. She looked out the window. I'm not a babysitter, she said. And your son doesn't need a project. He needs a person. Kevin leaned forward. You were the only person he's connected with in over a year. And that should tell you something, she said quietly. About this place. About what he's missing. Later that day, Kevin read her full dossier. Not just the resume, but her history. The scholarship she turned down when her mother was diagnosed. The after-hours dance program she ran for girls in Oakland. The state grant that dried up. The eviction they barely avoided. Her current income. Her silence. She had never asked for anything. That night, he called her. I want to offer you a full-time position, he said. Whatever you need. Car, housing, benefits. You deserve more. Marissa's voice was even. You call it power, I call it fear. He was silent for a long time. She continued. You're afraid because someone without a suit, without clearance, without permission, reached your son in a way no expert, no consultant, no speech therapist could. That's not power. That's truth. In the days that followed, the story spread through whispers. Some laughed. The janitor? The one with the mop cart? Others scoffed. Next, she'll be CEO. But a few, the quiet ones, started watching. One of her colleagues, an older woman who had worked in sanitation for 19 years, placed a hand on Marissa's shoulder one day. We saw, she said. You're not alone. Kevin began to change, not in sweeping declarations, but in details. He spent time with his son now, not just in meetings, but in minutes. They drew pictures. Some were of a woman dancing. She looks like the cleaner, he said once. She's not just a cleaner, Kevin had said aloud. And then he paused, because even he didn't realize how much those words were for himself. In the HR wing, a report surfaced, one that listed Marissa's previous internal applications, 12 total, all denied by the same two managers. She's overqualified, one had written, but not a culture fit. Kevin began asking questions. Behind closed doors, he listened as the same excuses recycled themselves. No precedent, no recommendation, no visibility. He asked for access logs, internal transfer data, performance reviews. He didn't like what he saw. The human resources director confronted Marissa in the hallway. You're disrupting things, she said. I cleaned the system, Marissa replied. I didn't break it. Kevin asked her again, but this time differently. With your permission, would you help my son again? Not as staff, as someone he trusts. She looked at him. Hard. Only, she said, if it leads to more than just your son. He nodded, and in that moment, the walls around him, the glass, the privilege, the isolation, began to crack. The janitor hadn't moved up a floor. She had moved the floor itself. The next time Marissa arrived at Genbridge, it wasn't to clean. She didn't bring her cart. She didn't swipe into the janitor's closet or unpack rags and gloves. Instead, she wore jeans, soft sneakers, and a simple olive jacket. No uniform, no badge, just herself. And beside her, Kevin's son, Oliver. They didn't go to a therapy room or a company suite. They went to the park. Marissa watched as the boy, usually silent and clenched tight, walked toward the playground, where other children were screaming, laughing, falling, climbing. His steps were hesitant. His arms stayed close to his sides, but he kept walking. And then something shifted. A small girl offered him a red bucket. He took it. And just like that, he was in. Kevin arrived an hour later, standing behind the fence. He watched his son take turns on a plastic slide and offer a timid high five to a boy in Spider-Man pajamas. It was the first time he'd seen Oliver respond to another child. And it didn't happen in a 10,000-a-day sensory integration lab. It happened next to a sandbox, with wind in the trees, and someone who simply sat still long enough for him to be seen. A passerby recorded a short video. It went online that night. A black woman laughing as she spun a neurodivergent boy in circles, their hands interlocked. The boy's mouth open in something that could almost be a laugh. In the background, no suits, no structure, just sky. By morning, the video had over 2 million views. Comments poured in. "I don't know who she is, but I haven't stopped crying for an hour. The world needs more of this. That's not a MAID, that's a miracle." But Marissa didn't check the comments. She didn't follow the buzz. She just returned Oliver home. Inside the headquarters, the mood had changed. Not dramatically. Not yet. But noticeably. Kevin stood at an all-hands meeting later that week. He wasn't in a blazer. No slides. No investors in the room. Just employees. All of them. He cleared his throat, holding a printed image in his hand. The frame from the video. His son and Marissa, mid-spin. "This is the most important image produced by this company this year," he said. Silence. He continued. "I've spent years building bridges between markets, countries, labs, and capital, but I forgot the bridge within." He turned to Marissa, sitting quietly in the back. She didn't ask for a promotion or applause. She didn't want a spotlight. She just acted, because that's what humanity does when it's allowed to breathe. He paused, then added, voice cracking slightly. "She reminded me how to be a father." The following week, GenBridge announced a new internal program, Bridge Within. It offered flexible hours for parents of neurodivergent children, paid support, peer-led groups, real-time inclusion efforts, and most importantly, leadership roles reserved for employees who historically were only ever given cleaning carts and silence. When Marissa was asked to lead the program, she refused. "I'm not the face of anything," she said, but she recommended a local community leader who'd spent years working in underserved neighborhoods, unpaid and unseen, to give it to someone who's been building bridges without a platform. That was always her power, not claiming the stage, but rearranging it. Later that month, Marissa was invited to a panel on workplace ethics and inclusive infrastructure. She stood on a stage in a donated dress, looked out at the crowd, and said, "I didn't fix anything. I just paid attention. He didn't need therapy. He needed someone to notice him, and maybe so did I." Afterward, someone asked what kept her going. She answered quietly, "The fact that silence doesn't mean absence. Some of us just haven't been listened to yet." In the GenBridge lobby, a new photograph was framed. Not the board of directors, not a lab breakthrough, just a single moment. A black woman and a boy dancing. The caption, "Understanding begins with a step." Her old cleaning badge was now framed on a wall in the staff lounge. Below it, a simple message written by the janitorial team in silver marker. "You weren't just cleaning floors. You were opening doors." One day, as Marissa walked through the familiar corridor, she paused. Behind a glass door, Kevin and Oliver were dancing. Not perfectly, not rehearsed, but together. Kevin met her gaze through the glass, then smiled. She smiled back. No words, no applause, but something inside her, for the first time in a very long time, exhaled. She kept walking, and for the first time, she knew she was visible. Not because the world had changed, but because she had helped change it. One step, one spin, one moment of being seen, and now nothing would ever be the same again.